Now that the shoulders are done, we can move on to the neck and the head, since they are literally built around the shoulders. Before the neck can be made, we actually have to start with the head. And for the head, I'm going to make a double joint. I can see here, according to my drawing, that the neck is about 1.5 centimeters wide up here. So that is the maximum width I want the neck to be. So I'm going to make the pin 1.3 centimeters wide, just because it'll get filled out a little bit extra as the neck is being made. And I really don't want the neck to be any thicker than 1.5 centimeters. So here's my pin, and the first layer is 1.3 centimeters with the second layer being 1.1 centimeters. I will also be coloring the outer layer in since it may be visible. Then I make the pivot, which will just wrap around the pin like this with the aid of some double-sided tape. And the pivot is 8 millimeters wide. And then I make the second pin, which is going to be 2.2 centimeters wide, with the outer layer being 1.8 centimeters. And like the deltoid, it's important for this pin to be as wide as the actual part you're making, so in this case the skull of the character. That way you have a solid point to grab onto when you're articulating the head later. And the pivot here is going to be 8 millimeters, the exact same width as the one I made just a moment ago. Okay, so now we have the fundamental components of a joint, where we just have a stationary tube of paper with another tube of paper that can rotate around it. Now normally, as you saw in my T-joint tutorial, I would just attach another tube of paper this way to act as a lever to articulate the pivot around the pin. But in this case, for a double joint, all you do is you take the two pivots of two joints and you just attach them together. And to attach these two pivots together firmly, just add some glue to the gaps here formed on either side. And just like with everything else, wrap it with a piece of card or cardboard. So you're left with something like this. So once you've firmly attached the two pivots together and tightened the joints by adding thin pieces of sticky tape to the pivot, we can go ahead and then add the two pins we've made. Just like the T-joint, proceed to wrap the pins with a piece of cardboard. And this is how the double joint would work. However, for the head joint, we're not going to be using a piece of card like this. Instead, one like this, which would just be a thin strip of paper that would be glued around, forming the semicircle at the back, which will be the back of the skull, essentially. And then once this piece of card is glued around the upper pin here, we can cut this bottom part off here because we won't need that anymore. And then this part will wrap around with the aid of some double-sided tape. Just like this, and then around here, forming the semicircle I mentioned. So I know according to my drawing that his head, his bare head, the skull, is 2.4 centimeters long and 2.2 centimeters wide. So I've just drawn that circle onto a piece of card, and this will just be glued up here, and this will just be glued onto here, starting to form the head, leaving this little lip here that will allow for the face to come down. And then this whole part here, which will be at the back of the neck, will have to be cut down a bit too, to allow for the neck and head to move back. And now, more or less, we have the frame for the head. And let's get on to the neck. So the next step is to just roll a tube of paper like this. One that will fit smoothly inside the bottom of the double joint here, as you can see there. I always like to attach things by just having double-sided tape around them so they stick in. And I'm also going to be adding some glue here just to make sure it stays there. I'm going to just wrap this with another layer of paper to create the smooth tube at the bottom of the neck that is needed to rotate smoothly in the actual neck joint. Just like this. The diameter of this cylinder here is 1.3 centimeters, just like the pin up here, and the length is also 1.3 centimeters of that strip of paper I just wrapped around. Now I have another strip of paper here with double-sided tape on this side that will roll into a tube that'll be 1.8 centimeters tall, and this is how the head turns. Now, take your two shoulders that you should have already made, as I showed in my last tutorial video, and wrap both of the levers with another tube of paper, and this tube will be what makes the arm rotate. And then both of these tubes of paper will be glued together to form a sort of bar that will be at the top of the body. and the neck joint will be going around this bar. At least that's what I used to do, except in this video, I'm actually going to be attaching the shoulders at an angle like this. And to do so, I'm just going to cut the end of the tube off so it's going backwards at an angle like so. And what attaching them at an angle like this is going to do, since the neck is going to be wrapping around the center of these two tubes here, this is actually going to pull the neck forward a little bit. So the neck is actually sitting around here, slightly in front of the shoulders. Whereas if the two bars were just attached straight to each other like that, then the neck joint would actually be in the center of the shoulders. And that isn't really accurate to real human anatomy, so when you actually look at a person with proper posture from a profile view, their neck appears to be sitting a little bit forward with their shoulders back. These two tubes here are actually going to act as the collarbones. And collarbones don't go just straight across on the top of the chest. They actually angle backwards and move backwards towards the scapula or the shoulder blades, creating this kind of diamond shape around the neck of a human being. And you can also see that illustrated in my drawing here. See, this is where the center of the shoulders would be right here, and the center of the neck is actually offset forward a little bit like that. And then this will also allow the chest, as you can see from my top view drawing, to actually curve backwards. And then this is this diamond shape I was talking about earlier, sort of around the neck, formed by the collarbone and the scapula. Anyway, this would also be a good time to tighten this tube of paper around the lever of the joint here. So I'm just going to feed a piece of sticky tape through this tube here, and I think that'll be fine. It's not actually too urgent since the arms will always be removable on your final model. So you can always just go in with like a piece of sticky tape around the tube here to tighten it up, or even just layer this part with some sticky tape to just make that a little bit thicker as well. And then I just glue them together. And I'm actually going to add a bit of sticky tape here just so it actually holds in place until the glue dries. And once these two are glued together, I'm going to wrap it with another piece of paper. Now this is going to do two things. Firstly, it's going to help these two tubes holding the shoulder joints stay together. And secondly, it's going to provide a rounder, flat surface for the neck joint to actually slide over. And now, around this center point here, wrap another tube of paper. And so now basically, just like the T-joint, this bar holding the shoulders is acting as the pin for the pivot here, which will be what makes the neck move forward and backwards. And then this kind of pivot around the lever of the head joint will be acting as the lever for the pivot here. So once this is attached, then that'll make everything move. And then the pin here is also acting as a pivot around the lever for the shoulder joint. This is how everything comes together. It is all just tubes of paper rotating inside other tubes of paper. And how they connect, well, that's where it gets fun. That's where we can get a bit creative. So I just wrap a nice piece of card here around the pivot of the neck. Glue the bottom of the pivot on the head joint here. And just slot this right in here. I think I'm going to remove the head joint here so it doesn't accidentally get glued. And there we go. That is more or less the structure of the neck done. So all that actually really has to be done now is just wrap some paper around here and color it in with the proper skin tones, and then the neck is done. Alright, so I can see here that according to my drawing, the neck is way too tall. So I'm just going to have to cut this down a little bit. Much better. Okay, so making the actual neck is pretty simple. Basically, you want to split it up into two parts. You want to split it up into like the throat section. That's sort of going to stick out a little bit, and this is going to tuck into the chin later, making a much more natural looking neck. And then like the rest of the neck that will wrap around your frame. So this throat piece is just like a little sort of soft diamond shape, and it needs to stick out a fair bit, so I'm trying to really curl it up so it'll hold its shape after it's glued. I might even hot glue it. And it's just sort of going to sit on the front of the neck like this. And yeah, so it's creating this sort of shape from the top. And then for the rest of the neck, I'm just going to attach this piece of card here that's been colored in ever so lightly with his base skin tone, and then there's this little detail on the back that's been shaded in. That will simply just wrap around like this. And of course, any parts covering up this hole here need to be cut out so it can still slide over the rest of the body. And you can see the shape of the neck is already pretty nice. Now these are the neck muscles at the front of the neck that are very prominent with their cylindrical shape. And so I've decided just to make this a separate piece so I can shape them much more nicely. That's just a flat piece of paper drawn like this. And then I have these two little ends up here that are going to fold down, pulling these insides back to connect with them. So there'll be this sort of curve shape to the neck muscles. And so with some double-sided tape and glue, this will be sticking around the front of the neck like this, forming a fairly convincing neck, I would say. And that's it. That is how I make the neck joint. There's really not that much to it. It's pretty straightforward, but it is looking quite good so far. Alrighty, thanks for watching everybody, and make sure to leave in the comments any questions you may have about how I made this or anything else, and I'll do my best to reply to them. Bye!